Jennifer, can we start with you?
Sure. There's a variety of interesting ways that we've been able to use open data, and by making our data available to the public, that we've been able to benefit from new apps and new analytics that come back to us that then inform our policy planning. So just to give you a few tangible examples, the cycling area within our city that's responsible for cycling planning recently created an app. It was a private-public partnership, and that app was used and has been used by cyclists in the city, where they can essentially map their ride. So you can sign onto the app, and the app will then show where you are traveling throughout the city, which then becomes a very powerful tool for us in the city to understand where people are cycling in the city, where the highest usage is, and what the gaps in the infrastructure might be. So by creating the app, sending the app out into the public domain, it's a free app, people download the app, they use the app, they then begin feeding back to us information about their daily activity on their bikes that begins to show us where the patterns of movement are taking place in the city in a really fine grain that we otherwise would not be able to map, or we would not have access to that information. So that's an example of creating an app that gets used in the public realm that then begins to generate data that we can then further use for our policy planning in advancing a key objective around creating a multimodal city where people have the opportunity to travel by walking, to travel by cycling, or to travel by transit. Another interesting example, we create ward profiles. So the City of Toronto is 613 square kilometers. It's a large geographical area. It's about 5 times the size of Manhattan. And there are different densities that exist, so the ward boundaries get larger or smaller. There's 44 ward areas across the entire city. In each one of these wards, we take census data, and we comprise that census data to create ward profiles where we analyze the average income, the average family size. We create all kinds of analytics that become very important for the municipal councillor as a tool to understand the trends and demographics within their own ward. We recently made all of the raw data from the analysis that we undertake in these ward profiles. We made all of that raw data available to the public. So we put it on our open data website, and within days of making it available, we started seeing analytics coming back to us that were being created by the public. So we've been having a great debate about families and family housing. I was amazed because we made all this data available, and a day and a half later, someone had created a map showing the areas of the city and the percentage of children that live in the city in those various areas, where there are large families, where there are small families, and that became a very important policy input. Essentially, they just took the raw data, mapped it, and flipped it back to us. And by flipping it back to us, then gave us this very important analytic in terms of understanding some of the patterns of growth and change in the city. All we did was make the data available. We made the data available, and it came back to us in new forms because it had been manipulated in interesting and new ways. We recently put out our data related to our official plan, all of the raw policy frameworks in our official plan. Now, typically when someone wants to submit a planning application, they'll come forward to the city planning department, they'll sit down with the planning department, and they'll say, what are the policies that apply to this specific site? And we'll say, okay, well, there's this bylaw from 1986, and there's a site-specific policy. Oh, and there's a secondary plan. And by the way, the affordable housing policies apply to this site. There's a large sites policy on this site. And we compile for them a relatively complex array of policy frameworks that will pertain to that specific site. Well, recently, we had a company come to us and say, look, if you made all of these policy frameworks available in OpaData, what we would like to provide as a service to the development industry is they can give us their property address, and we will create an algorithm, and we will pump back to them all of the relevant policies that pertain to their site. So taking away a meeting, a whole layer of analysis and work on the part of city staff, because now there's a private entity that's taken this data and reconfigured it using a very clever app in order to provide the information that the development industry needs. And just to paint a little bit of a portrait for you here, City of Toronto is one of the fastest growing cities in North America. We have over 104 cranes in the air. We have over 5,000 development applications on an annual basis. So if you can imagine, when someone comes along with an app that takes away an entire step in our process around evaluating the policies on a site-by-site basis, and all we have to do is put the data into the public realm, this is a tremendous benefit to the public sector because it takes away a whole layer of work that's required on our part, and we're simply making that data available. So one of the things that we're seeing as a result of us over the past year and a half making a tremendous amount of data open and in the public domain, what we're seeing is all kinds of startups that are popping up. And in fact, I was sort of threatened by some of these startups because they came to me and said, look, if you don't make your data open, we've got these great ideas. We're going to go to other cities and do this where the data is open. We're based in Toronto, would love to do it in Toronto. There's an enormous demand because there's so much growth. But you know, if you're not here, if you're not prepared to make the data available, we'll just go do it somewhere else. And we went, well, wait a minute. This is an important part of supporting entrepreneurialism that has a direct benefit to the livability of the city and to the private sector. So we worked very hard to make data available. Now, there's a tension because the challenge is there's some information that we simply cannot make public. We have sensitive property data information that we cannot make public because it would compromise the interests of the municipality. So we've in fact gone through a relatively intensive due diligence process to assess what is in the interests of the municipality in not making public, and where can the municipality benefit from making information public. So whereas I recognize the ambassador talked about just making everything public, we're conscious that there's some constraints given some of the confidential information that we have in the land development industry. There's some information that is probably not in the public interest to in fact make public. But our position has been through open data at the City of Toronto. We want to make available as much data as possible, as much as is in the public interest to do so. And we're seeing great outputs from doing that.
Great, thanks Jennifer. I know I have a couple of my cycling friends back in Ottawa who are waiting for me to ask a certain question. If we have time, I'm going to come back to you about cycling and data, but I'd like to, Karen, give you a chance just to talk about your experience and maybe build on some of the points that Jennifer raised.